Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today. We're going to go over understanding the link between domestic violence and suspicious deaths, prevention, intervention, and support. My name is Cynthia Gachipine. I will be your main presenter today. A little bit later towards the end, we will have a guest speaker, Rachel Turner, who will be presenting. A little bit about myself. I'm an Indigenous Latina woman who has over 6 years of experience in victim services, specializing in supporting survivors of violent crime. I hold a bachelor's degree in human services, and I graduated with certifications in group facilitation and conflict resolution. I'm a nationally credentialed victim advocate through the National Advocate Credentialing Program, and I have been credentialed with them since 2022. And I founded Empowerment Advocate Alaska in 2024 to provide pro bono victim advocacy services for individuals and families who do not qualify for traditional victim services. And I do this while continuing to work as a victim service provider for nonprofit. Today, we're going to go over understanding domestic violence and the cycle of abuse, domestic violence and suspicious deaths, the hidden connections, warning signs and lethality risk factors, the connection between strangulation and suspicious deaths, prevention and early intervention strategies, supporting survivors and those at risk, and then we will have our guest speaker, Rachel Turner, discussing Kirsty's Law. So, understanding domestic violence and the cycle of abuse. First part we're going to go over is, what does domestic violence look like? There's a handful of ways that someone can commit domestic violence towards another person. One of those ways is the most common that we hear about, which is physical abuse. This looks like hitting, slapping, punching, kicking, pushing, or restraining somebody, throwing objects at someone, blocking exits so that a person can't leave, damaging property to intimidate a person, for example, taking someone's phone and breaking it, blocking doors and maybe breaking the door itself, putting holes in walls around the survivor so that they're afraid to leave. The next abuse cycle we have is emotional. So that looks like constant criticism or humiliation, insults, name calling or mocking, threatening to leave, harm themselves, or take children away. That's on behalf of the abuser. They'll make these threats, often making the survivor feel responsible for the abuser's anger. Psychological abuse usually looks like gaslighting, so denying events or saying that the survivor is imagining things, twisting facts to make the survivor doubt themselves, blaming the survivor for the abuser's behavior, isolating the survivor from friends and family, creating fear through unpredictable behavior. Then we have sexual abuse, which usually looks like pressuring or coercing someone into sex, ignoring their refusal or discomfort, sexual touching without consent, using guilt, threats, or manipulation to obtain sex, controlling contraception or reproductive choices. Then we have financial abuse, and that usually looks like taking somebody's wages or benefits, not allowing access to bank accounts, forcing someone to account for every expense, preventing someone from working or studying, running up debts in the survivor's name, for example, taking out credit cards in their name, putting utilities in their name without the survivor knowing that this is happening. Coercive control, that looks a lot like monitoring phone calls, messages, or social media, setting rules about who someone can see or where they can go, using jealousy or concern to justify control, threatening consequences if rules are broken, gradually removing independence and confidence from the survivor. On this slide, we're going to go over what the cycle of abuse generally looks like. The first phase in the cycle of abuse is usually the tension building phase. During this phase, tension slowly increases. What this can look like is the abuser feels irritable, critical, the abuser becomes irritable, critical, or controlling. The survivor feels they are walking on eggshells. Minor arguments, jealousy, or blame start to increase, and the survivor may try to keep the peace to avoid conflict. The impact that this has on the survivor is they become fearful and have a lot of anxiety because they sense that an outburst or abuse is coming. The next the next phase in the cycle is the explosion or incident phase. This is usually when the abuse occurs. What this will look like is physical, emotional, sexual, or verbal abuse. There will be threats, intimidation, or violence, and then loss of control by the abuser. The impact is that the survivor may feel shocked, frightened, or helpless. The third phase is the reconciliation, or sometimes called the honeymoon phase. This usually occurs after the incident, and the abuser may attempt to repair the relationship. What this looks like is that the abuser apologizes, promises to change, gives gifts, affection, or excessive kindness to the survivor, begins to blame stress, alcohol, or the survivor themselves for the behavior that occurred, minimizing or denying the abuse itself. The impact is usually that the survivor may begin to feel hopeful and believe that the abuse will stop. The fourth phase is the calm phase, and this is when the relationship appears stable again. What this can look like is there's no obvious abuse, the abuser behaves normally or lovingly, and the survivor begins to relax and trust again. This phase reinforces attachment from the survivor to the abuser, but usually tensions begin to slowly build again, and the cycle continues. Going forward, we're going to talk about what are suspicious deaths, and those usually are deaths ruled as accidents, suicide, overdoses, or unexplained causes. So, why do these deaths often go missed? The first one is survivors may never report abuse. So, there are several reasons why they might not report abuse, and some of that may be from fear of the abuser, being isolated from help of family and friends, which may leave them with nowhere to go, and then having possibly a trauma bond with the abuser. And then abusers may appear cooperative or grieving. So this behavior can occur during investigations into allegations of abuse as well as during death investigations. This creates the appearance of cooperation and potentially reduces the investigator's suspicion. Systematic gaps in investigation and response. The systematic gaps in the response to suspicious deaths include inconsistent investigative standards, limited information sharing, and inefficient recognition of domestic abuse dynamics. Lastly, systems often examine incidents in isolation rather than patterns. So when incidents are treated as separate events rather than connected behaviors, patterns of abuse and escalating risks can go unrecognized. So we want to emphasize the importance of asking some of these questions. What was happening in this person's life before they died? Where were there signs of control, fear, or escalation in the relationship? Were there recent separations, breakups, or custody disputes? and or protective orders, police reports, or prior investigations in place. Warning signs and lethality risk factors. Some key red flags that indicate increased danger are escalating frequency or severity of violence, threats of homicide or suicide, access to weapons, especially firearms, extreme jealousy, stalking, or surveillance, strangulation or choking incidents, forced isolation from friends, family, or services, recent separation or attempts to leave, substance abuse combined with controlling behavior. The lethality indicators are prior strangulation increases homicide risk significantly, and we'll go into that a little further later on in the presentation. Patterns of control and coercion, and then the abuser's belief of ownership over the victim. So the connection between strangulation and suspicious deaths. Strangulation as a predictor of fatal outcomes. So most people who are aware of victim services know that strangulation is a big indicator of if there will of a homicide will eventually occur. And so I'm going to kind of just go over a couple of slides that focus on this. Strangulation is often one of the strongest predictors of future homicide in domestic violence cases. Survivors of non-fatal strangulation face a significantly increased risk of being killed by an intimate partner. Research shows a strong correlation between prior strangulation incidents and later fatal outcomes. Even a single strangulation event signals extreme and escalating danger. From strangulation to suspicious deaths. Victims may survive initial strangulation but remain at high risk due to ongoing and escalating violence. Many victims do not report strangulation or seek immediate medical care. Delayed or absent medical intervention increases the likelihood of fatal injury over time. Fatal outcomes may initially appear accidental, natural, or undetermined. Careful investigation of prior strangulation is critical to accurately determining cause and manner of death. Oh, I'm so sorry, I skipped something. Ending here, overall, research shows victims who have been strangled by an intimate partner are several times more likely to be killed by that partner later. Victims who have previously been strangled are estimated to be 10 times more likely to be killed by their partner versus those who have not experienced strangulation. And in 2020, the CDC found that 5.9% of intimate partner violence homicide involved hanging, strangulation, or suffocation. Prevention and early intervention strategies. So, how community members can safely intervene. Trusting instincts and taking concerns seriously. What this can look like is if something feels wrong, it often is, so trust your instinct. Abuse is not always visible. Changes in behavior, isolation, or fear matter. Keep in mind that taking concerns seriously does not mean accusing, it means paying attention. Early concern can prevent escalation and harm. Documenting concerning behaviors when appropriate. Keep factual notes of what you observe, dates, time, and behaviors. Avoid assumptions or labels. Focus on what was seen or heard. Documentation can be important if concerns escalate or professionals become involved. And always remember that safety comes first. Do not collect information in ways that put anyone at risk. Encouraging connection to resources without judgment. So offer support without pressure or blame to the survivor. Use non-judgmental language such as, I'm concerned about you, rather than saying, you should leave. Share information about local or national support services when it is safe to do so. Respect that some people may not be ready to act, but staying connected with them still matters. So, what not to do? Confronting the abuser directly. Direct confrontation can increase risk for the survivor. Abusers may retaliate or escalate control after being challenged. Focus on supporting the survivor, not managing the abuser. Forcing the survivor to leave. Leaving is often the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship. Pressure can remove the survivor's sense of control and choice. Remember that survivors are the experts on their own safety. Support should empower and not dictate. Sharing information without consent. Sharing concerns without permission can break trust. And once that happens, oftentimes the survivor may not confide in you again. It may alert the abuser or increase surveillance and control. Confidentiality keeps survivors safe. Expectations, sorry, Exemptions may apply when there is an immediate danger or safeguarding duties. So if you believe, for instance, there's, an immediate possible homicide can occur, then that is when you may, you know, want to feel like calling the police to make a report. Those types of things, like immediate dangers that you're seeing, or you're hearing an abuse actively happening, maybe when you would want to make that report. Supporting survivors and those at risk. So, trauma informed ways to offer support. So, listening without blame or pressure. We want to allow the survivor to share at their own pace. We want to avoid why questions and advice giving. We want to focus on listening rather than fixing. And we want to let them know that we believe them. We want to validate their experiences. So acknowledge what they've shared without minimizing it, using affirming statements like, that sounds really frightening, or that sounds really scary. Validation helps counter shame and self doubt, which does empower the survivor. And you don't need to fully understand to show support. There may be circumstances sorry, that you don't understand, and that's okay. As we said earlier, the survivor really knows their situation better than anybody else. And so, really, all you can do is be there and offer the support that you are able to offer and be consistent with that. So, respecting autonomy and safety choices. Survivors may make choices that others don't understand. So, keep that in mind when you're working on resources based on their safety. And that's being a personalized and survivor led safety plan. It really is kind of up to them how fast or slow they may want to make that plan, and they know their circumstances, so they know what they kind of need to do next. They might need a little bit of help to get some kind of brainstorming going on, but overall, they really are an expert in themselves and the situation they're in. Even if it's, a really bad situation, they are aware of what that normal day to day looks like. So they will usually have a really good idea of how to make a safety plan that works for them. And they may just need a little bit of assistance in coming up with some brainstorming ideas. And then emergency plans and exit strategies. We want to support survivors in meaningful ways by respecting their decisions, and we want to ensure that we support them no matter how fast or slow their exit strategy may be, or if they do leave and still go back. We want to make sure that it's survivor led. It's important to remember survivors may attempt to leave about 7 times before successfully ending that relationship for good. The best way to offer support is to stay present and consistent without becoming discouraged so the survivor does not feel isolated from their friends, family, or community. I think that's really key there is what I've seen in a lot of the cases that I've worked is the person who stays very consistent in the life of the survivor, even through all the ups and downs, is usually the person that the survivor will feel most comfortable coming to when they really are finally ready to end that relationship and not go back. And they're ready to make a very solid plan because they know that that person didn't leave when there were ups and downs. They stayed by their side and stayed consistent. So that's something really important to think about and remember when you're working with survivors is that consistency can make all the difference. So supporting survivors and those at risk, available resources. You want to be able to provide different resources that are available in your area. I know in Alaska there are some resources that are statewide. Of course, there are some that are just locally based. We have a lot of tribal resources. So, keep all of those things in mind. We have domestic violence hotlines. There are local advocacy organizations. There's some organizations that provide legal assistance and protective service assistance for protective orders. And then there's also counseling and crisis support that some organizations and tribal entities offer. At Empowerment Advocate, we provide direct advocacy services for domestic violence survivors. If you wanted to know a little bit more about what we provide, I would recommend going on our website and you can see we have a domestic violence and sexual assault page that you can go on, and it is very detailed in the type of support that we provide. And if a survivor calls us and we can help them with a few of the services we have and provide, but maybe there are other services that we don't provide, we always will reach out to and do a soft handoff to another organization that can assist them. So we always make sure that they have full circle services as much as possible. So supporting loved ones after a suspicious death. And this one is pretty hard. The next few things I think we're going to talk about are not easy because it is something that is not as common as other types of violence, but they really are key to helping surviving family members. And they do need a lot of support during these times. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations can't provide that support, not because they don't want to, but because, they may just not be able to due to the services that they offer. So one of the things we want to focus on is how the community around can support the surviving family members of those who've died after a suspicious death. So we want to recognize trauma and grief, and that can look like understanding that family and friends may experience a mix of shock, anger, guilt, and confusion. We want to remember that all reactions are normal. Some people may withdraw, others may seek constant information. We want to remember that trauma can affect people's memories, decision making, and emotional regulation. And then we want to listen actively and allow them to express themselves at their own pace. I think all trauma and grief affects all of us very differently, and to just be a very understanding person during that time can make all the difference to those family members and friends. And then connecting family to advocacy and investigation support. So at Empowerment Advocate Alaska, we do provide tailored direct service support to surviving family members of suspicious deaths. And then you can find more information on that on our website. It is on our MMIP page. And although we do primarily help MMIP survive suspicious death circumstance survivors, we do help others as well. So you do not necessarily have to be MMIP. If it's a suspicious death, we will still assist you. It just is under our MMIP page because that's usually the um, population that calls to ask for that service from us. But we do assist all people. We want to encourage families to ask questions and participate safely in any investigation. And we want to help them access resources or practical needs. And those can be things like funeral assistance, support groups, mental health resources. There are a lot of good resources out there in Alaska, and sometimes you might have to just look a little bit, more to find them, but they are out there. And as I said earlier, you can always call us at Empowerment Advocate Alaska, and we can either, if the person qualifies for our services, we will assist them. If they don't, we will still connect them with somebody who can assist them. So going forward, I'm going to introduce Rachel Turner, and she will be speaking next. She is a mother on a mission to create change. She has over 4 years of dedicated work on Kirsty's case, seeking justice for Kirsty and advocating for community change through Kirsty's Law. Successfully achieved a change in Kirsty's death determination. Won a civil judgment against Kirsty's prior partner in a tort case, resulting in a wrongful death ruling. Received strong support from individuals, organizations, advocates, and businesses to bring Kirsty's Law to the attention of legislative representatives. Victims for Justice approved Kirsty's name to be displayed on the homicide memorial at Hollister Park. And she has an ongoing goal to pass Kirsty's Law to better protect families and victims by proactively equipping law enforcement and medical examiners with the tools needed to respond to suspicious deaths or premature death cases.
Thank you everyone for joining us. First, I'm going to talk about Kirsty, and then I'm going to go into Kirsty's Law and what that entails. Kirsty was my daughter and my only child, also my best friend. We were very close. She is missed and loved every moment of the day. She was born in Anchorage and was a Valley kid her whole life. She enjoyed the outdoors. Thank you everyone for joining us. First, I'm going to talk about Kirsty, and then I'm going to go into Kirsty's Law and what that entails. Kirsty was my daughter and my only child, also my best friend. We were very close. She is missed and loved every moment of the day. She was born in Anchorage and was a Valley kid her whole life. She enjoyed the outdoors, taking pictures on her camera. She was smart, beautiful, a hard worker, funny, and resilient. Her signatures always had hearts. She put hearts on everything. She always excelled in school, from being on the honor roll to graduating early and with honors. She was also awarded a $10,000 scholarship to UAA for being one of the top 10 in her class. Kirsty was kind-hearted, always willing to help others out. She was a great baker and cook. She always tried to see the best in others. Kirsty put other people before herself a lot. Kirsty fell into a domestic violence relationship at the age of around 20. I believe that relationship and the other person involved in that relationship ultimately was the cause of the end of her life. There was a history of domestic violence with multiple strangulations reported to the authorities. That person has been found liable for her death in a civil lawsuit against him. Kirsty was found lifeless in her home in 2021 with his belt around her neck. I can only take comfort in the fact that Kirsty believed in God and she is surrounded by his love now and forever. Our goal is for better investigations and unexpected deaths. Kirsty did not deserve this, and neither does anyone else. Kirsty's Law and the need for stronger investigation protocols. This proposed legislation is modeled after California's Joanna's Law, SB 989, from 2025, and seeks to strengthen Alaska's response to domestic violence-related deaths by requiring more thorough investigations, helping to ensure these deaths are not misclassified as suicides, accidents, or undetermined causes. Alaska has the highest rates of domestic violence homicides in the nation, with about 58% of Alaska women experiencing domestic violence or sexual assault in their lifetime. Too often, these deaths are misrepresented as suicides or accidents, allowing perpetrators to evade accountability and leaving families without answers. Adopting a law similar to California's SB 989, Joanna's Law, would help establish protocols to prevent these hidden homicides. The vision for Kirsty's Law. Mandatory comprehensive investigations. In any death where the deceased has a known or suspected history of domestic violence victimization, law enforcement must conduct a thorough investigation prior to classifying the death as a suicide, accidental, or undetermined death. Required actions include reviewing police records, protective orders, prior medical reports, and any history of abuse, conducting interviews with family, friends, and those familiar with the victim's relationship history, gathering and preserving physical and digital evidence that could indicate foul play or a staged scene. Also, lifting jurisdiction to be able to provide further assistance in investigating if the family feels it's necessary. Mandatory autopsy requirements. Require coroners or medical examiners to perform complete autopsies in cases involving known or suspected domestic violence victims. The following 10-point checklist must be considered. 1. The decedent died prematurely or in an untimely manner. 2. The scene of the death gives the appearance of death due to suicide or accident. 3. One partner wanted to end the relationship. 4. There's a history of being victimized by domestic violence that includes coercive control. 5. The decedent is found dead in a home or a place of residence. 6. The decedent is found by a current or previous partner. 7. There is a history of being victimized by domestic violence that includes strangulation or suffocation. 8. The current or previous partner of the decedent or child of the decedent or the decedent's current or previous partner is the last to see the decedent alive. 9. The partner had control of the scene before law enforcement arrived. 10. The body of the decedent has been moved or the scene or other evidence is altered in some way. Document all injuries, including subtle signs of strangulation, blunt force trauma, or defensive wounds. Reporting and oversight. Develop an Alaskan violence prevention commission or a designated oversight body to review all domestic violence related deaths classified as suicide, accidental, and undetermined deaths annually. Submit a yearly report to legislator identifying trends, disparities, and needed reform. Community and victim family support. Ensure that victims' families are informed of their right to request a review of the investigation if domestic violence history is present. Provide access to victim advocacy services during death investigations. Specialized law enforcement training. Mandate annual training for law enforcement officers, coroners, medical examiners, and investigators on identifying signs of intimate partner homicide, recognizing staged crime scenes, properly documenting and investigating suspicious deaths tied to domestic violence. Prevent domestic violence homicides from being misclassified as suicides, accidents, or left undetermined. Improve homicide clearance rates. Deliver justice and closure for victims and their families. Strengthen Alaska's commitment to protecting vulnerable domestic violence victims.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you listening to our webinar and listening to information we have about Kirsty's Law. If you want to contact myself, you can email me at cynthia@empowermentadvocate.com. You can also go to our website, empowermentadvocate.com, where we have a contact form. If you have any specific questions for Rachel, please reach out to me via email and I can get you in contact with her. We really appreciate you all listening to today's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars. Thank you.